Now let's talk about a config-driven application. As you can see over here, we are hard coding stuff in our application as we did with the port and with the database. So this is not really good to do, because after you're gonna have to, if you ever change this address, you're gonna have to go everywhere where you add it and change it. So we're going to set up a few files that is gonna check which environment we are and set those values accordingly. For example, as I mentioned, I add the dev over here. For example, if you're gonna be in production, you would use a production database instead of this, because you don't want to be coding, practicing and stuff in your production database. That's a no. Or a test database would delete all the content in your database every time you run it. So let's create some configuration files to specify when and where we want to use this information. That's why we create the config folder. So I'm gonna stop my server and I'm gonna create a few files, source/config. First I'm gonna do an index, then dev, and I prod. Those are shorts for production and development, kind of obvious. And we're gonna start with the index, which is gonna be the base configuration. Node exposed something called the process for us. The process is the Node.js process, and it exposes the environment for us. From here, we can get the Node-env. This contains what environment we are on, like production or development. So this one, we're gonna start to play around with it, and this is gonna be equal either this or it's going to be a development. So it's first gonna check if it's set. If nothing is in there, it's going to set as a development. Now we can create a const to make that thing short, because it's a bit annoying to type that stuff all the time. And then it's gonna be the process.env. So this one is gonna be either be the one that's already set, or it's gonna be development. We're saving it in this env variable. Here we're gonna create a base config object. Base config. This can hold anything that you want. All your secrets can be here. Here's where you can put your API keys, like your Google Maps API keys, or your Braintree or PayPal API key, stuff like this, things that you want to keep secret. You should never add this to your code. You should never commit this stuff to GitHub. And then we're going to create an empty config here, and we're going to fill up this env config with the data from this switch block we're making over down here. So we're going to test for the env in case it's a development, or in case it's the shorthand for it. We're going to do this env conf. So here is going to be equal to the development config. We don't have this yet, so let's go and create. It's going to be a development, and here we just need to create a const called dev-config, and we can add all that information we want. Usually we put a port, and here we can use the process.env, which also has a port variable that we can set. We can set it for 3000, either the port or port 3000. We can now set our database, and here is going to be, let's put database.development, we need a comma over here. This is the name of the database. We can name whatever you like. I'm just making sure that is different from the other ones. And whatever secrets that you want to put for development. So with this done, we just need to export as a default dev-conf, and now we can import here. So just to import, from dev. So now we have access to this dev-conf over here. We can continue. So that will be done. So we do a break, and then we can test for the next case. case production, or case the shorthand. And here we do the same. I'm just gonna copy this, but instead of the dev, it's gonna be prod. Let's go and create this again, but this time I'm gonna copy this one and I'm gonna paste in the production. Here I add production, and I'm gonna change the port to 88, which is the default port for HTTP requests. And I'm just making these ports like this so we can see the difference while we're testing now. So we have this. Now we just set the default, which is the env config over here, like that. So in case this environment will be equals to development or just dev, we will use this dev configuration file, the database and whatever secret is in here. If it's production, if this equals to the production, we use the prod configuration, and you always gonna default for the config. With this done, we can just export default. So here we need to merge this and this base config together. We need the env configuration and the base config together. So you're gonna use Nodejs merge for it. So do npm install Nodejs.merge. Nodejs is a set of libraries that it helps do like little mathematical stuff and little piece of JavaScript code that is really helpful. So here we can import merge from Nodejs merge. Here we can do merge, and then we just merge the base config with the env config. So again, here we need to import the production from prod. Okay, so let's recap. Node has this process, it exposes the process, and from there we can get the environmental variables from it. There is a variable called node.env that stores whatever environment you are, like if you are in your server or in a production environment, or if you are in development like we are in here. If either is going to be already set or it's going to be development. And then we are using this result over here and saving it into this env variable. Now we are creating a base configuration. You can add anything over here, which is going to be shared amongst both development and production. So you can add anything over here. Let's do, there we go. This will be saved and it's going to be available to us on both development and also the production. So we have the base. This will be shared between dev and production. And then we have an empty env config, which is gonna be populated by this switch block. In case we create two cases, one case for the development and one case for dev. Depends if you're putting or you put setting the node environment variable in there. So it's getting the env config. It's populating with the dev configuration in case it's a development, and here in case it's a production. The fconfig is gonna be production, and you have it defaulting to dev. Here you're using merge from Nodejs that is gonna put this environmental env config and base config together. So another thing that you need to be sure, these three files is gonna be stored in our GitHub. So for development, it's fine if you have this, because this is quite common scenario that you use localhost database to store. Ports, no one cares. You don't really have many secrets over here that you need to save somewhere. But let's say you are sharing API key between your development environment, because you actually need to use the API key on your development. So API key. And here, whatever, like my secret key. So in this scenario, as we're gonna commit this to GitHub, it's gonna be available to anyone to see. Whoever download your code is gonna be available in there. Same goes for the production in here. You would share this one, and this one would be available as well. Production, you never use this localhost. You have a hosted database like MLab, and then this is the database you need. You're gonna go and paste over here, and then your password. So all of this is gonna get committed, and that's not gonna be safe anymore. So what do? You're gonna use a library called .env that is gonna actually keep this in your local machine and save. So let's install npm install .env like that, and you can create a file called .env in the root of your application. So inside, what are the variables? API key and a database. When working with global variables like this, we tend to always use capitals. So here we're going to cut this out like that, and also this one. Equals, they're wrong, save. And now to use over here, you'd call the process.env.database. Here the same is the process API key. Remember, the process from Node will expose the whole environment you're using, and these are the variables that you globally expose with this file over here. But these APIs are not there yet, so you need to actually add it. And you could add in a configuration file, but we can also add over here in the start script. So here we are going to use .env/config, and that's going to be a required. So -r.env config. So this is going to pick up this file from the environmental, and it's going to load those variables into our process.env. Now we save these things inside our production environment. And now dev, we have these ones, and these are completely fine. Here we can change as well for the production. So this API key won't be shown in our development. This one is fine to stay. We can do the port. So let's do here on the env, we can do a port as well. 8080. So there you go, we have the process.port. And here I'm just gonna leave as well the process port, or 3000 in case we didn't set that port. So now let's test it out and see if it works. If you do npm start, everything works, and the port is running on port 80. So this was something that we hard code that we need to change as well. So if you go back in here, we can change this for process. Actually, let's create a variable. Const port equals the process.env.port. So in here, we can use port, and back in here, we can use string interpolation to add the port, but we need to change this for backticks. There you go. So now when you run, this should be reflected in the environment over here. So I'm going to change for 3000, and then I'm going to run my server again. So as you can see, now my port is running, my server is running on port 3000. So the application successfully pick up this file with this database, and we can use the data as we're doing over here. We're no longer hard coding anything. We have our development database that we can show our API key over here. So now we change the port, is no longer hard coded, and our development, our environmental keys are working. So now let's go and refactor our database so we can use the config instead of this. So here we need to import our configuration file. So import app config from config. Here inside the function, we need to pass that app config variable so we can pick up inside. So we set it from to config, just like that. And here, instead of the hard-coded database connection, we're gonna call config.database. So now if I run, I'm getting this error here. Of course, I made a mistake there. The dev here is not equals, it's a colon. And also in the prod, just like that. Now it works. Let's change the environment while we are in here. To make sure we know which one we're dealing with, the config will be, the development environment is going to be port 3000, and the production will be port 8080. And I'm going to also remove this port from here because it's no longer needed. So we're going to change the environment before starting our server. And for development, here is production. Beyond the export as well needs to be changed. So everything works properly. For production, it's going to show port 8000. For development, 3000. So let's test this out. To change that, you need to go to our package.json, and here on the daemon, they start, we do, before we call the node daemon, we pass the new variables. So node env equals production. And then we can call whatever else we are dealing with. So if you run the code now, start. Server is running on localhost undefined. And then there's authentication failure because probably my password is wrong. Password 123. And here the same way we call config.database, we're going to pass a port. So here, instead of setting to process.env, because we deleted the one from the env, we need to do config.port, which is gonna come from the configuration file we create. Import app config. Now when you save, it should work properly. Actually, let's just call it config. So we know that this belongs to this config file. So now it's all well, it's running on 88 because the production, it's 88. Now if you remove that production environment we set for dev, and we start the server again, you pick up the 3000 over there. Here, that's why you created the development and the two cases over here, the development, the shorthand, and the development or production, is because you can use them over here if you like. Prod, save, and then if you, here, as I said, you always need to, because you're dealing with the port the server is on, the node daemon is not going to pick it up, a change on it. So there you go, 80. Now let's quickly recap. This will keep our database, our secrets safe, like API secrets and everything like we did with our production database over here. And then we are passing it for the production. We're passing it straight from there. So this we can this can be saved in together with your code with no risk of exposing any of your private stuff. So another thing we need to do, we need to add this .env because it has our security key over here. We don't want this to go anywhere, as we mentioned. So we're going to add it to the git ignore .env over here. So now when you're going to try to save, this is never going to show, but in case you are sharing your code with your colleague or someone that needs these environmental things to work. So for them to know what is it that they should have in order to make your app works, you should copy this, copy the .env and call it whatever, .sample, there. So this one's going to be saved to GitHub. And then you come here, you delete this, and you delete the secret key. So whoever picks up this code of yours in the future, will know that they need an API key over here and a database key. So this will be saved in your computer. You can add whatever you like. This one is gonna go as a sample for them to know what they need to add. And yeah, now we have a fully functional config-driven application. So now that we've done all the configuration necessary in an application, let's commit it to Git and push it to our Git repository. If you do a Git status, we have a few new files inside the config folder, the env sample, and we modify all these files. So let's do git commit with message. And here we can say development environment. This is how I always name my commits. It's based on what is it that I worked, so development environment, and what I did after the colon. Here we add our database connection plus app configuration. And that. Then we can git push origin master. There's my Express app, and I have my commit done over there.